The metaphor of the boiling frog says that if you took an ordinary live frog and you dropped it into a pot of boiling water, the frog would immediately sense the danger that it's in, and it would jump out. But if you took that same ordinary frog and placed it in a pot of lukewarm water, and then very, very gradually brought that water to a boil, the frog wouldn't recognize the danger that it's in until it's too late. Today I raise the question, is the next generation swimming in a reality like that of the boiling frog? Now, while we're not swimming in this metaphorical pot of water, we are all perpetually swimming in stuff. For the sake of this session, stuff will refer to anything that enters our lives, physical, digital, mental, emotional, that requires some part of our attention in order to be resolved successfully. Stuff isn't inherently good, it isn't inherently bad, stuff just is. Stuff can take many forms, from emails to social media to errands to chores, but because it all requires some attention, it'll fit this broader category we'll refer to as stuff. Now, my awareness of stuff really began about 20 years ago as I started my career in teaching. I was young, I was single, I had my first classroom, my first set of kids, and very quickly I had more stuff to manage than ever before. Now, I show this particular photo because there's a detail in it that adds some important context. I wonder if you can see it. Thank you for that. The extent of technology in my first classroom consisted of a few desktop computers with floppy drives. It wasn't long after this photo, however, that digital connectivity would enter into the educational system, and with online databases, websites, emails, online assessments, all that goes with it. And education would be that much more complex. As I entered my second year of teaching, I was surprised with the diagnosis of a congenital brain malformation, one that would require immediate and life-altering brain surgery. And this event, it really rattled me to the core and added new complexity to my life, both physically and spiritually. A few years later, I met my amazing wife, Nikki. We were married in 2005, and this would bring a richness and a fullness to my life. And it would change the responsibilities of my life from just me into a we. Nikki and I have since been blessed with 4 amazing children. My son, Will, my daughters, Samantha, Nora, and Izzy. Being a parent is just the greatest gift, and it's brought new depths of joy. And it has absolutely increased my responsibilities. Over the course of just a few years, the complexity of my life and the amount of stuff that I was navigating had changed dramatically. It was about a decade ago that I really started to realize some things that were taking root in my life as a result of the amount of stuff that I was navigating. And I began to sense the boiling waters around me. I walked in the door one night from work, and I looked up to this scene. Now, as amazing as this was, there was a problem. I wasn't there. Mentally, I was still at work, preoccupied with all of my stuff. My attention had become fractured, scattered. I was overloaded, distracted. I never really was where I was. And my stress levels and anxiety levels were on the rise. This gave birth to some questions. Was there something wrong with me? Was I the only one experiencing this? Was there a better way to manage it all? And then ultimately, my focus shifted into the young people I was working with. How are they managing all this stuff in their lives? Now, this story of increasing complexity that I told is in many ways quite natural. If you think about a young person, the journey from dependence on parents towards independence is really what growing up is all about. And it's really quite beautiful and natural. A toddler getting around for the first time, a kindergartner getting on the bus that first day of school, the transition to middle school or into high school, getting a driver's license, heading off to college. But there has been a significant shift in this reality, one that cannot be ignored. And while it's true that every generation faces a reality unlike that of the generation before them, this generation is facing the most complex and dynamic reality in the history of the world. Digital connectivity has changed everything. The way they learn, play, interact, date, shop, travel, everything. So what's the big deal? Why is that important? Well, current research says that the human brain is capable of holding about 4 things in short-term memory, or in cognitive RAM. Beyond those 4 things, the cognitive load begins to have an impact on the brain and the body. That impact could come in the form of forgetfulness, fatigue, sleeplessness, anxiety, stress. Now, digital connectivity has provided freedoms and advantages and opportunities that previous generations have never even conceived of. The world's knowledge and history is literally being carried around in pockets. But digital connectivity has also exponentially increased the volume and velocity of stuff coming at us each and every day, every hour, every minute. Young people are sifting through and navigating more inputs than ever before, and all of these inputs are generating stuff. Stuff requires discernment. It requires decision-making. It requires attention. It requires cognitive RAM. It can feel overwhelming. It can be distracting. It can even be addicting. The American Psychological Association recently did a study on how much stress teens are facing and how they're dealing with that stress. What they found was that 82% of teenagers reported consistently experiencing moderate to extreme stress during the past school year. 82%. Overload is very real. In that same study, they looked at how are teens coping with this stress? What are they doing? And what they found was that the majority of teenagers are coping with stress by further plugging into the sea of connectivity. Distraction is very real. The executive functioning system in young people is on hyperdrive. The waters are boiling. Now, it would make sense that given this new reality and this new arc of complexity that young people are facing, that a new mindset and a new skill set would be needed. We simply cannot parent, teach, coach the way we have in the past, not because there's anything wrong with what's been done, but because this new reality is so vastly different. The foundational behavior for young people today will be the ability to think, to conceive of new ideas, and to make them happen. This will be the ultimate 21st century skill. Creative thinking and problem solving are unique human capacities and ones that could never be automated. This ability to think, however, is being threatened by this volume of stuff. Stuff introduces drag. It leaves cognitive residue. It can occupy cognitive RAM. Now, in order to really, truly, deeply think, one needs to be able to dynamically steer focus and attention towards the things that matter most. And to do this, 2 things are needed: control and perspective. Control here refers to stability, or the ability to bring order out of chaos, while perspective refers to clarity of direction, or knowing where one's actions are leading in any area of life. This visual is called the map of control and perspective. The horizontal axis represents a spectrum of low to high control, while the vertical axis represents a spectrum of low to high perspective. As young people interact with stuff, they reveal tendencies and habits. And these behaviors can give us some insight as to where control and perspective may be beneficial. As a general rule, young people tend to fall into one of 3 categories on this map: responders, achievers, and dreamers. As we take a look at each of these categories, if you're a parent or you have a young person in your life, I'd like you to think about which of these descriptors would best match them today. In the lower left-hand quadrant, we have the responders. Responders tend to struggle with both control and perspective. At their best, they're observers. They're flexible. They go with the flow. They take in their environment. They're very present in the moment and in the current conversation. They intend to engage with whatever has their attention most at that time. In a traditional classroom setting, responders are compliant. They aim to please. They often prefer to have a clear path laid out for them rather than having to make decisions for themselves. As complexity grows and stuff builds, however, responders can feel like stuff is happening to them. It can leave them feeling powerless and uninspired. And at the extreme, it can lead to shutdown and can leave them with feelings of depression. In the lower right-hand quadrant, we have the achievers. Achievers tend to be high control. At their best, they're structured, they're organized, they're naturally detail-oriented. In a traditional classroom setting, they're hardworking and diligent. This often results in good grades. Our traditional gifted programs, as we've designed them today, are full of achievers. However, as complexity grows and stuff builds, achievers can get caught up in the busyness of what they've defined as success. They can have a tough time connecting what they're doing with any deeper passions, often losing track of those passions altogether. Achievers get caught up checking the boxes of life rather than actually living it. And at the extreme, the obsession with details can rob them of a deeper joy. In the top left quadrant, we have the dreamers. Dreamers tend to live in a world of high perspective. At their best, they have big ideas about how the world could be or should be. They're creative, often very curious. They love to start new projects. In the traditional classroom setting, they can be great contributors to discussion, but their lack of control can make it difficult to meet deadlines and get routine work completed. And this often leads to academic struggles and masks their inherent gifts. As complexity grows and stuff builds, dreamers can have a tough time taking action. They tend to procrastinate, hoping that if they ignore stuff, it'll eventually go away. And at the extreme, they can be mislabeled ADHD. Now, as you reflect on this map, do you recognize a young person in your world? Do you perhaps see yourself? Well, what if we could equip dreamers with the control needed to transform ideas into action? And what if we could equip achievers with the perspective to live more openly, more freely? And what if we could equip responders with the control and perspective needed to feel empowered and inspired? The good news is that control and perspective aren't just a result of genetic temperaments. They can be learned. It is possible to learn to generate the appropriate control and perspective to apply to any situation, creating the conditions to bring the best version of yourself possible to any situation. So you might be thinking, okay, what does this look like? Give me something that I can take away today. Well, let's say you're working with a young person who's struggling with distraction. Try this. Help them to identify 1 to 2 super simple actions that they could take to get themselves started. These actions should require very little decision-making or thought. Get book out of backpack. Complete problem number 1. Look up hours of driver's ed online. Write those 1 to 2 things down on a Post-it note or an index card, and then step away. From a cognitive standpoint, this relieves the cognitive load on the planning and prioritizing part of the brain and allows for movement. Movement generates momentum. Momentum leads to an increased sense of control. Or let's say you're working with a young person who's just feeling overwhelmed. Try this. Grab a sheet of paper and have them write down every single thing that has their attention at that moment. Or have them tell you and you write it all down. And once you've captured it all, turn that piece of paper around and see what shows up. This activity is called a mind sweep, and it can act like a laxative for a backed up brain, and it can free up cognitive RAM, leading to an increased sense of perspective. Now, these are just a couple of very simple tools that can be used to help the human brain do what it was created to do: think. This ability to harness control and perspective at will describe someone in a new 4th category. These will be the navigators. Navigators will be pioneers in this new reality, able to live a healthy, balanced, productive life. Navigators will be able to generate the control needed to have clear space to think. They'll be able to see through distractions, set their sights on clear outcomes, and make things happen. Navigators will use control and perspective like a GPS system to position themselves for success. There is no more important skill set than we can offer the next generation than that of control and perspective. It applies to everything. It impacts everything. 85% of the jobs we're preparing the next generation for, they don't yet exist. They haven't even been conceived of yet. This will be the ultimate make it up and make it happen generation, and they will need to think clearly and implement effectively amidst a historic amount of noise. Think and move. Perspective and control. So while ill-defined and extremely complex, this new reality, it holds limitless possibilities. Let's equip the next generation with the thinking tools to thrive in it. Thank you.